80s did one thing exceptionally well, and that was it taught us how to start a song. The big guitar intro is one of the staples of so many 80s classics. Before the singer or even the rest of the band join in, the guitar sets the tone for what's to come. I'm about to show you 5 iconic 80s rock ballad intros, and we're going to talk about why they're great and what we as guitar players can learn from them. So I'm going to kick things off really strong with one of the most iconic guitar intros of all time, let alone of the 80s, and that is Wanted Dead or Alive by Bon Jovi. It sounds like this. This is probably one of the most recognizable guitar intros of all time. It's played by guitar player Richie Sambora. Now, the original of this is actually played on a 12 string. What we have is a descending pattern, and it actually sounds a lot more difficult than it is to play. It's actually based around a really simple 16th note picking pattern. So when you're playing this, all your picking hand is doing is playing D, G, E, G. 1, E, and A. That is just the picking pattern for the majority of the riff. But to accompany that, there's this descending melodic phrase. Now we're starting out by playing the 14 of the G and the 13 of the E. Then we shift to the 12 of the G and E. Down to the 10. Then the 9 of the G and the 8 of the E. So you'll notice over those first 4 changes, the picking pattern hasn't changed. All that's changed is that chord shape. Now, one important thing to note here is the finger arrangement on my fretting hand that I'm using. So whenever I'm playing 2 notes on 2 different frets, I'm using my index finger for the high E and my middle finger for the G, like so. That's also being used down on the 9. But when I'm playing 2 notes on the same fret, I'm actually playing it with the middle and the ring finger. This allows me to change shape very easily. So basically my middle finger is always playing the notes on the G, but the note on the E string is switching between my index and my ring finger, depending on what formation the notes are in. So once we get to that point, we then come down to the 5th fret on both strings. Then the 4th on the G, the 3rd on the E. So that's the descending run up to that point. But at this point, there is a slight change. We do move down to this shape, which is 2 on the G, 1 on the E, but we're playing something different with the pick. We're going... So I'm starting on the 4 of the G, picking that, sliding it down to the 2, and then playing the 1st fret on the E. So that comes straight out of the previous note grouping, so it'll go like this. So when you're playing that previous chord shape, you're actually playing that 4 on the G twice, because the second time you play it is that slide down. So a riff like this teaches us a lot about our cross string picking, because we're actually moving between 3 different strings all the time, and there's a bit of string skipping there. But also it teaches us the importance of how dynamic we are with our pick. It's very easy to overpick that open D string. If you pick that too hard, it kind of drowns the melody out. And it's very easy to kind of sound a bit messy with this one. So when you're playing this, you want to aim for a real even picking texture across all the notes. And that's a great way to work on that, is just take one of the chord shapes and try and get all the notes to sound even. The softer you can pick, the better, because this is a very gentle and expressive riff. So what you don't want is this. You don't want to be digging in too hard there. You want to just let the notes kind of float. This also is a very good exercise for our coordination as we move down the neck. So here's how this one sounds played slowly. And then once again at full speed. Next up, we're going to check out one from one of my favorite 80s bands, which is a band called Cinderella, and this is the intro to a track called Coming Home. Now I love this one because it actually explores going between arpeggiated chords and strummed chords. And in terms of the chords that actually make this up, it's pretty simple. It's just a G to a C add 9. And then we've got this little passing chord there where we drop the C to the B. And there's also a D chord in there as well. But it's basically G, D, and C. So pretty straightforward chords. Now we're starting out on that G chord with this little arpeggiated line. So there's a very particular pattern to this arpeggio. We're playing the E, A, and G with the G chord held in place. Then we're playing E, A, D, G. And then just the E. So it's 3 notes, 4 notes, 1 note, all from the same chord. Then we're going to that C add 9 chord, but we're playing this with the 3rd fret of the A string and 3rd of the B and E played, and the D and the G are played open. We're playing this chord 3 times. Then we're dropping the root note from the 3rd fret to the 2nd fret of the A string, which is the B note, and then we're playing it 3 more times, followed by a very slight pause and then 2 more hits. So it's 3, 3, 2. And then it goes back to the arpeggio. So it actually repeats that phrase twice. So that will sound like this. On the 3rd time, we're doing the arpeggio the same. But then instead of going back to the G root at the end, we're actually going to a D chord. And we're kind of just dragging through the chord a little bit. You don't want to strum all the strings at once. You want to just slightly drag it. Then we're doing that C add 9 move again. So after 3 repeats of that riff with that slight change on the 3rd, then we're just going to 2 bars of G, which is played with this rhythm. Which is 1, 2, and 4, and 1, 2, and 4, and. So there's a couple of cool things we can learn from this riff. It's the dynamic of switching between arpeggiated chords and strummed chords, but also the focus on not strumming too hard when you get to those chords, because what you can do is you can easily drown out the arpeggio. You want to pull back on the chord strumming so that the arpeggio is nice and even sounding, like so. Because those picked notes are so important to this song. It's very easy to, again, hide them like with the previous riff. You can hide them by strumming certain notes too hard. So this is a great example of a riff that uses chords and single notes and teaches us how to blend them in the right way. Here's how this one sounds played slow. And then once more at full speed. Now we're going to look at a slightly busy one that kind of verges on a little bit of a country influence, and this is by the band Skid Row, and this is the intro for the track I Remember You. It goes like this. So this is another very iconic 80s intro, and staying true to that kind of 80s power ballad thing, it really once again uses those classic power ballad chords, which is a G and a C add 9. This time we're playing the C add 9 with the second fret on the D and the open high E string. And there's also some kind of lead lines in between. That's why this one kind of takes on a little bit of a country kind of flavor. It's got that sort of fluidity where you're going from a strummed chord part to a cool little picked line. Now, in terms of counting this one's quite tricky because it uses some dotted 16ths. There's a couple of triplets in there. If you're new to playing, it can be quite a tricky one to count. So the best way to imagine the timing on this one is just to kind of listen to the rhythm of it. Now, what we're doing is we're starting with the G chord and we're playing this rhythm. So I'm doing down, and that one's hanging a little bit. And then I'm going up, down, and then up, down, up. So that's going to sound like this. So aside from that first strum, we're starting with an up for both the other groupings. So it kind of always feels like everything is on the offbeat. And that's another reason this is quite tricky to nail down. So just think of that rhythm. Once you've got that rhythm locked in, that's your first part. So that's the G chord. So once you've got that locked in, then you can go on to the first of the little lead fills, which is this. So we can do this inside of the framework of the chord. So we're playing that G chord. What we're then doing is we're essentially going to the C add 9. But this lick frames the C add 9 chord, so we're kind of moving into that chord with a lick. So the lick itself is the open A string, hammer onto the second fret, open D, and then the third fret on the B, which is already in place. Now what we're doing is when we're essentially going from the G to the C add 9, we're removing our little finger from that high E string, and then these two fingers are shifting down to the A and D strings. So this is the move. That lick bridges the gap between the chords. As we're doing that, we're then getting primed for that next chord, which is the C add 9. When you get to the C add 9, you're repeating the same rhythm. So lock that rhythm in first of all. So once you've got that first bar nailed, just loop that for a while to get that under your fingers. Then you go into the C add 9, exactly the same rhythm. So it's 1, 4, 3, same rhythm grouping. But this is where the lead lick changes. So there's a little bit more going on here. We're playing the B string open. We're hammering onto the third fret of the B and pulling off back to the open. And then we're playing the G open and the D open. So this uses a 16th note triplet, so it's quite tricky to count. So once again, just listen to the rhythm. On the record, this is actually quite quick, so this is that full speed. It's like a little kind of country-ish flick to it there. So this is quite a tricky one because the chord move itself is simple, but it's the lead runs that connect the two chords where you're going to find the challenge with this. And that's exactly the cool thing that this teaches you, is using little lead licks inside of a chord progression to create that kind of country or that kind of 80s ballad sort of feel. So here's how this one sounds in full, played slowly. And then once more at full speed. Now we're going to look at one that's a little bit darker sounding, but an iconic guitar intro nonetheless. And this is the song by Lita Ford and Ozzy Osbourne called Close My Eyes Forever. Now this one sounds way harder than it is because it's got quite a full-on picking pattern, but there's actually a pretty specific rhythm to this, so it's actually not as hard as it seems. Now the chord we're using to start is an open A string, the 7th fret on the D, the 5th of the G, and the open B and E. Now the picking pattern we're doing here is A, D, G, D, and then E, B, G, D. So it's just a simple 16th note picking pattern there. We're just playing that with that chord twice. That's your first bar. The second bar, we're changing the chord shape. We're playing the 5th on the D, the 7th on the G, and the open B. And the picking pattern we're doing here is D, G, B, D, G, B, D, G. So it's a group of 3, a group of 3, and a group of 2. We're doing that twice. So we're already halfway through the riff there with just 2 different picking patterns. Pattern 1. And then pattern 2. Then we're dropping that chord shape down to the 3rd fret. So we're playing 3rd on the D, 5th on the G, open B. We're playing the same picking pattern for the first repeat. But on the second repeat, there's a slight change. It kind of combines the 2 together. So we're doing D, G, B, D, and then E, B, G, D. So that one bar combines kind of both picking patterns together. And then for the final bar, we're actually revisiting that first riff once again for the first half of the bar, and then we're slightly changing it. So up until this point, everything has been played with straight 16th notes. 1 E and a, 2 E and a. But now for the first time, we're going to break that rhythm. So the final note of that descending run, we're actually holding for an additional 16th note, so it actually makes it an 8th note. Now, like with I Remember You, don't worry too much if you can't count this, because it can be quite complex to count these kind of things if you're new to playing and counting at the same time. So just listen to the rhythm of it and try and hear the rhythmic pattern. But what we're basically doing is we're just holding that last note slightly longer. And then we're playing this. So we're kind of combining 2 other parts here. So on the E of 3, it'll be open A, 7 on the D, 5 on the G. So it's like 3, E, and 3, just like that. Then we're switching to that inverted version of the chord, so it's 5 on the D, 7 on the G, open B. And that's our fourth beat, 4, E, and So it's 3. So that slight little pause can be quite tricky. The bar will sound like this. You can hear that slight skip there as we go into that final section. Now this one is really interesting because it teaches us a lot about keeping our pick very steady and consistent as we move through these different arpeggio shapes. Much like Wanted Dead or Alive, what you don't want here is any notes to kind of pop out. So you don't want to be hearing things like you don't want that because those notes are kind of ringing louder than other notes. You want to go for a real smooth, even attack across all the notes. So you can hear every single note of the pattern. It's a very dynamic riff, again, just like Wanted Dead or Alive is. So here's how this one sounds slow. Now, as I said, this one does sound daunting because we're playing arpeggios, but each chord has its own kind of rhythmic pattern. Break it down into segments and then start piecing it together. And you'll actually find it's not as hard as it sounds. And then once again at full speed. And the fifth and final one we're going to check out is by the band LA Guns, and this is one of my favorite 80s power ballads and one of the songs that really kind of kick-started my love of the genre. This is a track called The Ballad of Jayne, and it goes like this. Now this one is super simple. There's not much to this. We're actually basically working within the confines of a C chord. And this is a really fun way of using a very simple chord shift to create a very strong melody. So basically what you're going to be doing here is visualizing this as a C chord. So start off with a C chord shape. What we're going to do is we're going to play the root note, which is the 3rd fret of the A, and we're going to slide that up to the 5. You don't want to slide straight away. You want to let that C hang and then drag it up. But then keeping that shape in mind, our index finger will land on the 3rd fret of the B string. If we were to move the whole chord shape up 2 frets, that's where that finger would end up. And then we're playing that note. We're then playing the open G. So we get really simple melodic idea there. Then we're going back to the C. And that in a nutshell kind of is the majority of this riff. Then it repeats. And for a 3rd time. But then on the 3rd time we just have this little tail on the end, which is the 1st fret of the B played and pulled off to the open, and the open G. And that is the riff. Then it goes into the next part of the song, which starts with the G chord. So this is a really cool one because it's very simple. And Tracy Guns as a guitar player is one of my biggest influences. And I really think when they wrote this, they really nailed the melody and the simplicity. It kind of proves that you don't need something super complicated to create an iconic guitar intro. Now, some of these riffs have had some real challenging parts to them, but the reason I love this one is it kind of goes the opposite way. I love this because it is so simple, and it kind of proves that you don't need to do anything crazy to create something iconic. You can have a simple riff that's just a very simple melodic motif that sets up the song, but still really captures that iconic sound of the decade. So yeah, I love this one, and this is definitely one of my favorite 80s rock ballads. So here's how this one sounds played slow. And then once more at full speed. So if you look back on any of these 5, there's something very cool to learn. Even the most complex one in this list isn't the hardest thing to play, but there is obviously different levels of difficulty within this list. But try them all out for yourself and see what you can take away from these and add to your own playing. The big guitar intro is something I would love to see come back to music, and I think it's such an iconic part of 80s music, which is the music I love the most. And yeah, I just think there's something in there that all guitar players can learn from. Let me know down below in the comments what your favorite big 80s rock ballad guitar intro is. I'd love to hear what you guys love from that genre as well. Try these out. Let me know in the comments how you get on with them. Don't forget to hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel. And I'll see you guys very, very soon. Thank you so much for watching as always.